Good morning and welcome to Alive and Thriving. It's another beautiful day in the Sunshine State, and I'm super happy to have you here. We're going to be reading from Chapter 10 of Book 3 of Baird T. Spalding's The Life and Teachings of the Masters of the Far East, and I'm pretty excited about what we're going to be getting into today because yesterday we really dove into the core of the Christian religion, and in case you missed it, the core of the Christian religion is that each and every single one of us is capable of presenting the ideal of Christ and fully becoming said Christ. Now, if you're new here, that's a controversial claim to throw out at the beginning of the video. Nonetheless, this is graduate level Christianity. This is where we come to throw off the legalism, dogmatism, and ritualism and any of the cultural influences from our religious past or cultural past that tell us anything other about the Christian faith than what I just said. I do not intend that to come across as an authoritarian statement. That is simply what the Spirit has put on my heart to share with humanity, and thus I am fulfilling my role. So, in case you missed it, each and every single one of us is capable of presenting the ideal of Christ, and in so doing, through repetition and through holding true, you don said Christ. You move and have your being in the world as Christ did. You don't become Jesus Christ, you become the energy signature that is unconditional love. Said another way, Christ. Said another way, the first begotten of divine intelligence, which was unconditional love, synonymous with creativity. The next morning, as we were waiting for the abbot, a messenger announced that we were expected to appear before the Dalai Lama at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Thereupon, we went in search of the abbot and located him as he was leaving the audience chamber. His face was beaming as he held in his hand our commission to enter the country at will. After reading the order, which the messenger had brought us, he said, "This is not an order, it is only a request. The audience is called to confer upon you this commission." As we were all together, it was suggested that we go immediately to see the records. We proceeded thence in a group. Upon our arrival, a great surprise awaited us. There were thousands of clay tablets and records on copper and bronze plates. Also, beautifully carved tablets on thin white marble. As this was our first opportunity to contact this class of record, we decided to look them over at once. The abbot told us he was not familiar with the tablets, but had been told they were of Persian origin, and that he would attempt to find a lama who was familiar with them. Thereupon he departed, and we began to look them over. The characters were not familiar to any of our party. The tablets were made of 2 slabs of pure white marble, about 1/4 of an inch thick, put together like veneer with a cement that we could not identify. The edges were beautifully beveled, and around each tablet was a margin of 2 inches with carved raised figures. Many of these figures were of pure gold inlay, while all the tiles were of pure gold inlay but not raised. All of the titles were of pure gold inlay but not raised. The tablets were carefully numbered by sets and a serial number given to each set. The dates were represented by wreaths of flowers intertwined with vines and leaves. If we were to record a date like January 1st, 1894, the first month of the year would be represented by the stem of a flower not yet come into bud, inlaid with pure jade. The first day of the month would be represented by the stem just coming into bud, inlaid with gold. The 1 of 18 would be represented by the stem with the bud just opened enough to disclose the petals of the flower, and the petals of the flower are lapis lazuli inlay. The pastille being gold inlay with a small diamond set in gold. The 8 is the flower in full bloom, with 8 stamens showing. Each stamen an inlay of gold around the pistille, with smaller diamonds set in gold inlay. The 9 is represented by a rose with 9 petals in full bloom, 1 petal an inlay of lapis lazuli, 1 of jade, and 1 of chalcedony. This order repeated 3 times. This shows that the last or the end of the digits was reached. Thus, they used from 0 to 9, then repeated. The 4 is a lily in the process of opening with the pastille and 3 stamens showing. The bowl of the lily is an inlay of pale jade. The stamens are fire opal set in 4 small diamonds, and the pastille is of lapis lazuli inlay, set with 4 small diamonds. The space given over to the text is outlined with a thread-like vine inlaid with gold, and the leaves being inlays of green jade, and everything being worked out in perfect detail. Every tablet is a perfect jewel in itself, and the type of tablet and the method of dating would indicate early Atlantean. Each tablet would be worth a king's ransom were they offered for sale. As we were musing, the abbot and priest came up, accompanied by the old lama who had charge of the records. We became so engrossed with his recital of the history that it was necessary for the abbot to call our attention to the fact that the time for our appearance before the Dalai Lama was fast approaching, and that we should be in robes ere this. When we arrived at our quarters, we found robes laid out for each of us, but how to put them on was a fosser to us. The time was passing so swiftly that we decided to make a bold, quick try and put them on helter-skelter. It developed later on that some of them were inside out and others backside foremost, while a few had the robes on as they should be. Upon arriving at the audience chamber, we beheld the Dalai Lama crossing the hall with his guard to enter the chamber by the great doors. We were certain we saw a broad smile flit across his face. We composed ourselves at attention to await the opening of the side door, which was our cue to enter the chamber, and soon the door opened and we were ushered in amidst the most gorgeous decorations that had been our lot to witness. The ceiling of the room terminated in a great dome in the center. In this dome were 3 large openings through which great beams of sunlight flooded, lightening up the room with a brilliance and splendor too magnificent for description. The walls were completely covered with gold thread tapestries, interlaced with figures made of silver threads. In the center of the room, on a raised dais covered with a cloth of spun gold, sat the Dalai Lama, dressed in a robe of spun gold, trimmed with purple and spun silver cloth. We were conducted before the Dalai Lama by the abbot and high priest, and as before, they stood at either end of the line. After a word of greeting, the Dalai Lama stepped down from the dais and stood before us. He raised his hands, we knelt and received his blessing. As we arose, he stepped to our chief, and placing a brooch upon his breast, spoke through the interpreter. This will allow you and your associates the freedom of this land. You may come and go at will, and with it I bestow upon you this commission, which entitles you to the rank of a citizen of Tibet. I confer upon you the title of Lord of the Great Gobi. He then walked down the whole line, placed a smaller but similar brooch upon the breast of each one of us in the company. Wear this as a token of my esteem. It will admit you to the whole land of Tibet. It is your password wherever you go. He took the scroll containing the commission from the hand of the abbot and handed it to our chief. The brooches were beautifully made of gold, wrought in filigree with a most lifelike likeness of the Dalai Lama carved in relief on jade, set like a cameo in the center. To us, it was a jewel which we prize very highly. The Dalai Lama and all were graciousness itself. All we could say was, "Thank you." The old lama who had charge of the records was ushered in, and we were informed that we would share the evening meal with the Dalai Lama. After the meal was finished, the conversation drifted to the remarkable tablets, and the Dalai Lama, as well as the old lama speaking through an interpreter, gave us a detailed account of the history of the tablets, all of which we carefully noted. It seems that these tablets were discovered by the wandering Buddhist priests in the vaults under the ruins of an old temple in Persia. This priest stated that he was led to them by the sweet song he heard emanating from the ruins as he sat in samadhi. The songs were so sweet and the voice so clear that he finally became interested, following in the direction from whence they came, and found himself within the ruined vault. The voice seemed to come from below. After a thorough inspection, he could find no evidence of an opening, so he determined to locate the source of the voice. Securing crude tools, he began digging in the debris and discovered a flagstone that seemed to be only a portion of the floor of the ruined vault. His heart sank in despair, and he thought for a time that he had been led from the right path by the whistling through the old ruins. Before leaving the palace, or the place, he sat in meditation for a few moments, and as he sat thus, the voice became more clear and distinct, ending with the injunction to proceed. With almost superhuman effort, he succeeded in removing the large flagstone. This disclosed an opening leading downward. As soon as he stepped through the opening into the passage, it was lighted up by an unforeseen force. Ahead of him gleamed a bright light. He followed the light, which led him to the opening of a large vault closed by huge stone doors. As he stood for a moment before these doors, the hinges began to creak, and the great stone slabs swung slowly, revealing an opening through which he passed. As he crossed the threshold, the voice rang out clear and sweet as though the owner occupied the interior. The light that seemed stationary at the doors moved to the center of the great vault, lighting it fully. There, in niches in the walls of the vault, covered with dust and the accumulation of ages, were the tablets. He inspected a few, realizing their beauty and value, then decided to wait until he could communicate with 2 or 3 of his trusted associates and confer with them regarding the removal of the tablets to a place of safety. He left the vault, replaced the slabs, and covered it over again with the debris, then started on a quest for associates who would believe his story and who had the fortitude and means to carry out his plan. This quest lasted for over 3 years. Nearly all to whom he related his story thought he had gone stark mad. Finally, one day while on a pilgrimage, he came across 3 priests whom he had known while on a similar pilgrimage, and he told them the story. At first, they were very skeptical, but one evening at exactly 9, as they were sitting around the campfire, the voice began to sing of these records. The next day, the 4 of them dropped out of the company and started the journey to the ruins. From that time on, at 9 o'clock in the evening, the voice would sing. If they were weary and downcast, the voice would sing all the sweeter. At the journey's end, as they were approaching the ruins, an hour before midday, a slight boyish form appeared before them and began singing, leading the way to the ruins. When they arrived, the flagstone was lifted and they went immediately to the vault. As they approached, the door swung open and they entered. A short examination convinced the priests of the value and truth of the discovery. Indeed, so enraptured were they that they did not sleep for 3 days. They made all haste to a village about 70 miles distant to secure camels and supplies which would enable them to move the tablets to a place of greater safety. They finally secured 12 camels, loaded them, and returned. The tablets were packed in such a manner that they would not be injured. Securing 3 more camels, they started the long journey through Persia and Afghanistan to Peshawar. Near Peshawar, they secreted their burdens in a secluded cave, where they remained for 5 years. One of the priests always sat in samadhi before the cave all the time to protect the tablets. From Peshawar, they were removed to Landa in Punjabi. Here they reposed for 10 years. Then by slow stages, they were brought here and deposited in the palace of the Grand Lama. This took more than 40 years to accomplish. From this palace, they were to be taken to Shambhala. In other words, we had found them in transit. At this time in the narrative, an attendant brought 4 of the tablets into the room and placed them carefully on the raised place that answered as a table around which we sat, so that we faced them. Just as the hands of the clock pointed to the hour of 9, a voice came forth in lifting tones, infinitely sweet, yet of a highly pitched, immature, boyish treble. These are the words translated into English as faithfully as we are able to present them. That there is an all-wise, intelligent spirit, that this intelligence is divine and infinite and permeates all things, cannot be contradicted. Because this intelligence does permeate all things, it is infinite and is the source of all. It is divine and its divinity brought into thinkable or visible form, the fact or truth of all things. You can name this all-wise, intelligent spirit God or good or what you will, as man must have a name for everything. Once he has named a thing, he has power to bring it into existence. If man names anything through true reverence, worship, and praise, he can and does become that which he names. Thus, you can see that man, by choice, can become God or animal. He becomes the ideal which he presents for himself to follow. With this line of thinking, it is simple to see that man is the only begotten son of God, or the only begotten son of the animal, thus by choice. Man can become good or evil or devil if his eye beholds evil, or he becomes God if his eye beholds God. And right there is a really, it's speaking to me in that, because my eye has unfortunately been kind of fixed on evil recently, and it's due to the political climate in the United States. And this right here is kind of a gentle reminder for me to focus my eye back on God. Now, I do these videos for that very reason, letting you into my world here a little bit, and it helps for sure. This is the thing that has been put on my heart by Spirit to do, and so I appreciate you being here. In the formless state, the all-wise, intelligent spirit was silent and contemplative, yet the intelligence was there and saw itself as the producer as well as the spectator of all animate and inanimate things. In this silent state, the all-wise, intelligent spirit saw that there was no modification, and resolving to emanate or bring forth the universe, this intelligence formed a picture of what the universe should be. Having not but the perfect picture or divine plan to follow, the universe willingly took the form directed by the intelligence. The divine ideal picture was expanded until it came into perfect visibility. This is the universe that we see today. That is going on with the perfect plan held forth for it to assume. This intelligence is and always has been the perceiver and director of its perfect divine ideal plan. This intelligence knew that it was necessary to bring forth animate form and endow it with all potentialities through which it could express fully. This is what is known as immortal man. This divine ideal, which differentiates itself in all phases and directions, is the immortal of each man today. As this man was created in the divine ideal of all-wise intelligence, spirit, he was set forth as the son of the principle, with dominion over every attribute and every condition. Son means union with, not a servant of. It was necessary that this son be wholly free to choose and in no way become a slave or a puppet. Now, when I was living in South America, I was living with Vaishnavist monks, and their guru bestowed the name on me during my initiation ceremony of Paramatma Das. And Das means servant of God. But Paramatma means the soul of God, the soul of the soul, the animus, the thing animating God, if you will, the divine intelligence, the one infinite principle. And I was uplifted by Paramatma. That was an incredible honor to be given that name, and all those in the room did seem genuinely taken aback. And then Das came afterwards, and I immediately felt as though someone was putting a collar around my neck, as though somebody was telling me that I am a servant or a slave unto that divine principle, that ultimate animus. And that never felt right for me. So I never took the name Das. I rejected that from the very beginning. And I knew that I was correct to do so. And today we find confirmation in life and teachings of the Masters of the Far East that son means union with, not a servant of. It was necessary that this son be wholly free to choose and in no way become a slave or a puppet. And that is exactly what I've done with my life. I've chosen to acknowledge that I am the son, right? The animus, the thing animating my form, is that son, is that Christ signature energy. My personality is of my own creation, you might say. But nonetheless, I acknowledge that the animating principle of my form is that Christ energy, is Paramatma. And anything that ever suggests that you should be subservient to it, that you should accept what it says because it's an authority figure or whatever the case might be, should be rejected. At this point in time, independent cognitive thought, so that you can get yourself to this understanding that what you are is part and parcel of the one infinite creator, should be your only ideal. If you're really, really going for that Christ consciousness, if you're really going for liberation from cultural norms and religious dogma, then independent critical thinking is necessary, and rejecting groupthink is paramount. This immortal ideal must always include a portion or spark of the central fire of that which brought or projected it into existence. This projection was the first cell that finally became man's body and is the spark of life that always endures and never dies. This cell is, in name, the Christ. This cell, although divided and repeated many millions of times, retains the image of the divine spirit projected and implanted in it and cannot be perverted by man's thinking. Thus, man is always divine. This cell projects its divinity into every cell created by the manipulation of itself, unless perverted by man's thinking. The collection of these cells finally assumes unto itself a container or cover, which is called the human body. The spirit or essence, still in unmodified form, has the intelligence to see all changes going on around it. By always standing in his high dominion, man is spirit and spirit is God. This higher self must be thought of, pondered over, worshipped, and blessed as being right within man. So that is a bit of a thing, right? Because man needs a name for everything, or humanity needs to classify and categorize everything. It's a product of our left brain thinking. And when we hear something like higher self, we immediately think that it's something up above us, like something separate from us. But what it really means is the version of yourself that you attain when your thinking is of a higher order, when your vibration is of a higher frequency. When you are maintaining that, you are then your higher self. And we're talking about frequency. So just like the way that your radio may turn into a specific radio station and pick up a specific song, different from the song playing on the radio station of a different number. And even though those are similar radio waves occupying the same airspace, they're carrying different messages. So in so raising your vibration, and in so thinking of a higher order, you embody your higher self being right within humanity. First, there must be faith that it is there. This brings forth the knowing that it does exist in man. Then the blessings and thanks given bring it into visibility. Man is that very thing itself. This is the way to the attainment of all knowledge. The brain at first seems to be the perceiver because it is the aggregation of the more delicate cells. And these cells first accept the vibration and amplify them so that they may be perceived by man. Then they are selected and sent over to all the other organs, and each, if held in divine order, goes to the very organ to which it belongs. Each organ and nerve center is the seat or special amplifying center for centralizing the real man. When they are harmonized and coordinated, man stands forth in all dominion and power. He has brought forth the Holy Ghost, the whole of the all-wise intelligent spirit, in creative action. This is soul and body brought to one focal center. No man ever accomplishes anything unless he consciously or unconsciously brings every faculty to this one center. This is the place of power, the Christ within man, the place where man stands supreme. So in other videos, we've talked about a bit of a split perception that we develop when we're in these human bodies. One of our focusing faculties is focusing on the finite, the material world, and the conditions of the body, and the thoughts being received by the mind. And then the other portion of our focusing faculties, if you will, they're not separate from one another. They're just like you have two eyes, and if you could look in two different directions type of a thing. That's always focused on your immortality, your eternity, and the infinite goodness of all situations. And when we are able to bring those two, if we're talking about the analogy of like having your eyeballs be able to look in two different directions and focus on two different things at the same time, when we talk about bringing that focus together, we're talking about a couple of things. We're talking about using the mind as a projector to take the ideal of whatever it is that we are receiving from spirit and project it into form, the same way that planets are birthed, the same way that the human fetus is projected into the form, the womb, and then grows, and then the same way that spirit then projects itself into the lump of cells, and then the cells begin to take their form based on the intelligence of spirit. Now, where exactly was I going with that? The way of which to accomplish anything is to bring that focus together. To bring those two, one focused on the infinite and one focused on the finite, to focus on the endeavor, to focus on the mission, to focus on the creative process. And Jesus says, let thy eye become single. And we're talking then about the pineal gland. And that's right there. That's your third eye. It's a single eye. And when we talk about focusing our intent, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about channeling energy through our form into the creative process. And what they are saying is that no man ever accomplishes anything unless he consciously or unconsciously brings every faculty to this one center. This is the place of power, the Christ within man, the place where man stands supreme. So that animating principle, that unifying consciousness, when you operate from there, you are bringing your temporal faculties and your infinite faculties to bear on the one thing that actually is in existence, and that is the Christ. That is divine intelligence. That is the ether. I mean, it's the thing that makes up all things, moves in and has its being around it and through all things. Once you are able to tap that vein, if you will, then flow forth from it doth the spirit of life, the spirit of creation, the actual manifestation of things. It is a sort of long-winded way for me to give you an explanation of how thoughts become things. When you focus your faculty entirely on the creative process, single-pointedness of mind, as the Buddha called it, you will bring forth the object of your desire or the creation that you have perceived in your mind. And if you want some really enlightened texts on the practical application of somebody doing this, Nikola Tesla is probably the foremost creator from divine intelligence. And he said that, I build nothing that I don't first completely assemble and test in my mind. And that was exactly how he went about things. He had a very high level of awareness and communication with spirit and acknowledgement of his infinite source. And he would hold the images of his creations in his mind, and they would work perfectly. in his divine mind, in his higher self, and then he would use his faculties of the body to bring them into creation here in the physical, to build them. But everything was assembled in his mind in a blueprint, and he knew that it would work because divine intelligence had told him so, essentially had proven it to him, had shown that it was working in the non-physical, so then he would bring it into the physical, and when it worked, it was validation of everything that they're talking about here and everything that we've been talking about here. Not that Tesla was seeking validation for anything, but he was truly a servant of humanity, an angelic individual, and was giving us wonderful, wonderful gifts. Then how can man suffer discord, inharmony, sin, or sickness unless he idealizes them and brings them into existence? If he stands forth always and at all times as the all-wise intelligent spirit and knows no other, he could not be conscious of anything else. With this highest ideal always held in the clear waters of man's intelligent thinking, he becomes God. He is certain to be answered by this inner voice at all times. And when it says he is certain to be answered by this inner voice at all times, this is then coming from Dr. Albert Villoldo of the Four Winds Institute. The man is a shaman, and he talks about the culmination of the path through life, and he talks about how whenever he is certain to be answered by this inner voice at all times, he states it beautifully, and it is that for an individual who's operating at that level of consciousness, the Christ consciousness, the attainment of unity consciousness, cosmic consciousness, they are answered by spirit, and spirit comes in a moment's notice, like instantaneously at all times, because when spirit calls, they answer without question, instantaneously and at all times. And it's not an authoritarian relationship because God is good. And so any time that a request, you could call it maybe a request, or an intuition becomes their reality, it is in accordance with divine will. It is in accordance with divine goodness. So they then carry it out because it will ultimately bring about the best good, the highest good of all. And in so doing it, you're brought great joy and pleasure because you are giving great joy and pleasure to the multitude or the masses, or to the few, whatever the situation might be at that time. And it is good. And then when you call on spirit to fulfill a desire, it's going to be in accordance with the highest good of all, because your thinking will be amalgamated with spirit, and you guys will be one. Anything that you think will be done, and anything that is thought will be done. Back of will stands desire. Will, in its truest state, is a pure, colorless force and is moved into action by desire. If there is no color or direction given to will, it is inactive. Place the desire in harmony with the will force, and it will spring into action immediately and call legions to carry out its commands. The only requirement being that these commands are in divine order. There are myriads of worlds. There is but one thought out of which they grew. Its law is order, which cannot swerve. Its creatures are free to choose. Only they can create disorder, which in itself is pain and woe, hate and fear. These they alone can bring forth. The great principle stands forth as a golden light. It is not remote, it is right within yourself. Hold yourself within its glow, and you will behold all things clearly. First, with all your being, know one thing, that your own thought, when you stand, is one with that thought which brought forth the worlds. Out of the blackness of disorder and its outpouring of human misery, there must arise the order which is peace. When man learns that he is one with the thought, which is of itself all beauty, all power, and all repose, he will know that his brother cannot rob him of his heart's desire. He will stand in the light and draw unto himself his own. Let pass through your mind, my son, only the image you desire, which is truth. Meditate only upon the true desire of your heart, knowing that it does not wrong any man and is most noble. Now it takes earthly form and is yours. This is the law through which you bring forth your heart's desire. Let him who puts forth his hand to draw the lightning to his brother recall that through his own soul and body will pass the bolt. With further research, these tablets may prove to be copies of former records made to preserve the originals. If copies, they must have been made during the early Indo-Aryan age. As far as is known, there is nothing like them in existence today. From what source but the one did they spring? Thus, they could be repeated in song and verse many thousands of times. O man, where is your crown? From eternity it passes on. Where is your soul? But from the infinite it grew. Forever and forever it is but select to you. Here were the 4 tablets set before us, each one worth a king's ransom. Pretty powerful stuff there today, and some clear communications from the divine to me as I was going through some emotional stuff this morning before recording this video. And the message is pretty clear, and that is to continue to focus on the ideal. Continue to focus on the good and bring it forth. I was doing that for years, and it had a culmination of 9 months in South America, and some pretty beautiful things were transpiring during all that time. And it was when I came back to North America that I stopped focusing on just the goodness of the ideal, and I allowed myself to become immersed in the fast-paced rat race world that is Western society, which has stressed me out immensely. And so this is a good message today for me, and I hope it is for you insofar that in order to truly love and to thrive in our lives, we need to bring forth the ideal of good and of God. And if we've been persisting in a focus on negativity, in pessimism, in victim status, or whatever the case might be, then we've got some work to do for ourselves. And it's noble work. And as I see it, it's the only work that really matters. Which is tough when you live in a world that barters with paper dollars. So I pray that that changes, and I pray that each and every single one of you has a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for being here. Namaste.